talk about things that made me sad to play. Things that made me... I was uncomfortable throughout most
So
of
the
this.
reason I'm happy you're leading this
Yeah.
is because there's no way I could lead a dialogue about this game and not offend half the people watching.
Why is that?
Because what made me sad was less the gameplay and coming at it afterwards. Like,
Right.
not having come at it when it was new,
Yeah,
but
3
having
years
read all the dialogue online about what people thought about it and then seeing it and being like, holy shit, this is what you people took from this?
They really...
You're awful.
Yeah.
You're all awful.
This was divisive. This was a divisive thing. And that's actually why I picked it. So first of all, before we get started, hi everybody. Welcome to the loose horseshit portion of Grimdark Media, where we talk about what we're doing and why. And I got to pick the game media for this month, and I picked The Last of Us Part 2. And I picked it very specifically for a reason. I picked it because it was divisive, because I think it makes it more interesting to talk about. And actually because I think it is the most grimdark video game possibly ever made. This is 2020's The Last of Us Part 2. It came out...
God, was it 3 years ago
3 years ago already, yep. 3 years ago. It's the last... It is the highest spec sort of last generation console game. It took the PS4 and basically pushed it as far as it could.
Right.
It's from their premier studio, which is Naughty Dog, which means it's proprietary to PlayStation. And it's a follow-up to 2013's The Last of Us. So a bit of personal history with this with me is in 2013, guess who was born?
Oh.
Guess who was born? My daughter was born in 2013. Guess who looks a lot like the protagonist from The Last of Us Part 1 and has a little girl he's bottle feeding at 3 o'clock in the morning, playing a PlayStation game. The last of the PS3 games, by the way.
So can I tell you a funny aside?
Yeah.
Almost parallel experience. So anybody who really knows me knows that I'm very twitchy about anytime anything goes wrong with my daughter.
Sure.
Right? I'm very protective of her. I've always been that way. So when she was first born, like I would go to work, I'd go straight home, I'd spend all my time with her at home. I would not go anywhere.
Yeah, you did not. You did not. You went directly home from the office.
And that was it. Like right now. And one of my coworkers at the time was like, you know what, you got to get out. Like, you got to do something for yourself. You gotta get out.
I dragged you to movies.
And it wasn't you this time.
Okay.
But the very first time I let somebody convince me to not spend time with my daughter, and to be fair to this guy, he had no idea how this was going to go. The movie we went to see was Children of Men.
Oh my God.
So... I will say emotionally, I know where you're coming from.
Yeah. And so it's worth doing a brief description of my background with this property because my daughter's born in 2013, October. I'm playing this game overnight, basically, because I was doing like the overnight like bottle fieldings so her mom could sleep. And I have my like bottle drunk daughter pass out on top of me as I'm playing through the intro to 2013's The Last of Us, which is about a man about my age at the time losing his daughter.
Yeah.
And I have my guts ripped out by this game. And just to like synopsize, and I'm probably going to do a bad job and some people might disagree, but 2013's The Last of Us is a game where you watch a heroic transformation of a bad person who softens towards a young girl. And then the 11th hour sort of grimdark twist to it is that person is unable now to let them go and does a terrible thing at the end of the game where he, instead of basically escorting this cure who is cargo through the world, he softens towards her, becomes emotionally attached to her. And when he delivers her to these scientists who are going to make a post-apocalyptic zombie cure from her, they confess that it's going to kill her, and as opposed to kind of honoring her wishes, because he has an idea that this is what she would want, he murders everybody in the building, takes her and rescues her and leaves. And so you have this building feeling of heroism, but it is a much more traditional game in that while you are doing terrible things all through the game, you only feel them as being terrible in hindsight, and you are able to like morally justify all your actions based upon the saving of the world sort of like a premise that this is more important than everybody. And then at the very end, you make a very selfish decision and decide to like keep this person for yourself, even though it feels emotionally correct. And that ending is very divisive because as like a parent, I would probably do the exact same thing.
I think it is. I think it is the textbook example of that. When you stare into the abyss also stares back, because it's not about. There's an underlying idea there, and I don't really think that they're trying to get you to pick one of the two lanes.
No.
It feels like they're trying to make you uncomfortable with which of the two lanes you pick, no matter which.
And it is a tremendous game in that it deals with trauma, it deals with grief, and it deals with the consequences of those things for one person.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it is so. It's almost boiled to perfection in that it's a single man's journey through his trauma, the exploration of what that trauma means to him, and the consequences of that on one other person. And so I picked The Last of Us Part 2. And so before we go any further, you can tell me what this meant to you. So this meant this to me, but what did it mean to you? You played 1, you haven't played 2.
Correct. What I was actually going to say, though, is there's one other thing we should probably clarify with this. Because I know we've talked before about the fact that we are going to spoil whatever if you haven't played this yet. We should probably be really clear about, based on how loyal the adaptation of the TV series was to the first game.
Yep.
This is also going to probably spoil the second season.
The TV show. Series. Yeah, it's true. So even if you haven't played the game, and you don't want to play the game. So even if you're not a gamer,
if you're going to watch the second season, I would bet folding money that this will spoil that for you if you don't.
Absolutely.
Okay, so sorry.
What did the first game mean to you, maybe?
So the first game for me, I approached just as somebody playing a video game. So it was a stealth survival horror shooter.
And zombie games are like you're in my bonding thing. We both love zombie
games. And early on, that's really all it was to me. Like, I didn't have the emotional connection in terms of the time frame to the character, to the story, the way that it impacted you at the time that you were playing it. I really appreciated the journey of the two characters, of them bonding together. Narratively, it turned out to be more rewarding and more interesting than I expected it to be. Yeah. And I felt a lot of payoff through the story. And maybe what I alluded to, or didn't allude to, I said before about, I don't know that the game's trying to make you feel a certain way. It's just trying to make you question how you feel. Is I'm one of those people that played through it, murdered all the doctors at the end, thought, oh, that's probably not morally correct, and then thought, yeah, no, I get it. Like, I get it. Like, is this the right thing to do? Is this the right thing to do for everybody else? No. Can I see it? Yeah, I can see it.
Was this guy incapable of making any other choice? Probably not. Yeah. And I think that's the thing to me, that questioning, that kind of purity of message. It's a very linear storyline, and it's very linearly drawn, and you get to see it from the first person perspective. You do play as Ellie at one point, but you're not until sort of the DLC comes out and you kind of get her character rounded out more. She is a sort of like agent to represent his daughter. His surrogacy is as a parent towards her, growing is like the main drive of the main plot of the story.
Yeah.
And she's more rounded out through the DLC of the game, which I think is also important to acknowledge too, because it sets the stage for this later stuff. So I picked this game, and I think we are now setting sail. So let's set sail. Let's put our backpack on. Let's collect up some adhesive and some little bits of bomb and some explosives.
I know I'm gonna throw some broken bottles later.
Yeah, let's sit and practice the guitar with the PS4 controller, which you never had to do, but you actually play the guitar several times throughout this game. And let's get a bad tattoo over our arm to cover up our cordyceps bite as we bid ourselves bon voyage.
Testing, radio. This is where we spoil the entire story in Bon Voyage.
All right, so as this is the part where one last time we will spoil absolutely everything. This is our plot synopsis section of the episode, where we're going to basically go through the main story beats. Not in super detail, but to give you the idea of how this relates to like the themes of Grimdarkness. Our setting is the same as the first Last of Us game. It is a dystopian world where, due to a evolution of a cordyceps virus, which is a fungal infection that takes control of the host and tries to self-replicate, Basically, everyone has been herded into quarantine zones. These quarantine zones, you learn throughout the first and second games, have either survived or fallen. And most of what's really sort of happened is the dystopian world is that the government is taken over by the military. An organization called Fedra. They control the quarantine zones, which means they also control medicine, food, ammunition. And while they're ostensibly protecting the population in these walled off cities, they're also subjugating them.
Yep.
Most of the cities end in revolution. And the revolutionaries called the Fireflies are kind of the protagonists of the first game. The revolutionaries in this game are called the WLF, the Washington Liberation Front, and they overthrow the quarantine zone of Seattle. That is sort of our like dystopian setting that you learn about early on, and that most of these quarantine zones have now failed. As we come into the story, we are brought back to Ellie and Joel. And Ellie and Joel, it's 4 years after the fact, and we're presented with the idea that they've had some kind of falling out. And you did get the idea that that might happen in the first game when she asks what happened to the Fireflies, and Joel said they had lots of kids like you. There was no cure. They said that you were there, that it wasn't going to be able to happen. And she just kind of rolls over and doesn't seem to completely buy it and believe
And
it.
you can also tell in his delivery, and I mean, this is why Troy Baker is such a good voice actor. You can tell in his delivery that he knows what he's saying he shouldn't be saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like whether he's good with what he did or not, you can tell in that moment he knows. I love this person more than I love anything else in the world, and I'm lying to them right now.
I don't even know if it's I love this person more than I love anyone else in the world. It's that I'm too incapable of going through this again.
Yeah.
Because I would actually argue that it's less about his love for Ellie and more about his inability to let go of
He's
what
projecting.
she represents.
He's
and
projecting Sarah onto her,
exactly.
right?
And so this game is divided into 3 acts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and go through each of the 3 acts and give you the main sort of like arc of the story beat. Because narratively, and this is one of the things I think that was a criticism of this game, it is presented in 3 streams, each of which are front to back and back to front. So what's happened over the past 4 years in the first act is presented back to front. So it starts with sort of a falling down between Joel and Ellie, and then slowly back to front through like flashbacks explains what's happened there. And in the meantime, front to back, we are introduced with a new character, Abigail, her friends from the WLF in Seattle, and the sort of like happenings in the area around Jackson, which is Jackson Hole in Wyoming, which is where they've now settled for the last 4 years. They're living with Tommy and his wife, and Tommy is Joel's brother. And they're generally just like being part of this society. They're going on patrols. You can tell that Joel has become someone fairly important in the community. Tommy's wife is still the head of the leader of the community, or one of the leaders thereof. And it's kind of like a socialist world that has built itself up into really being something. It's walled off.
Everything is working, basically.
Yeah, it's walled off. They have like a barter system. They're growing food. They're providing for themselves. They have power from the hydroelectric dam that you clear during the first game with Tommy. And life seems pretty good, but yet nobody seems super happy. Joel and Ellie do not seem like they're doing super well. And through a series of flashbacks, we are shown sort of like they're falling out with each other. But without really understanding why, although if you played the first game, you're immediately suspicious as to how much Ellie knows, basically. And then they go out on patrol. And our focus is then split over to Abigail, and she is part of what seems to just be a group of survivors holed up in a hotel, living, like trying to make it another day. And they maybe are looking for somebody, but mostly they're just trying to survive. And they are in a hotel out in Jackson. If you don't know anything about that part of Wyoming, it's lots of resorts. It's a ski place. Like, it is a beautiful, often touristy sort of part of Wyoming. And all of these little enclaves seem to be inhabited now by people, as they are like the most settled parts of Wyoming where you could have a community and be together. As these two sort of narratives converge with each other, we have Ellie and Dina out on a patrol together. You can tell that there's something going on between the two of them. Jesse, who is Dina's ex boyfriend, is interacting with them back and forth, and he seems to be someone in sort of like an authority position with Joel and Tommy, as they are like kind of the hunters. They're like the warrior class of this society, going out, clearing infected, making sure that the routes are safe and the various like outposts are sort of like clear, and keeping on the look for both human and cordyceps zombie bad guys who might be hunting you down, or might be like dangerous out there lurking in the darkness. Now, as the two narratives converge, Tommy and Joel, who Dina and Ellie are out looking for, are rescue Abby, who is cut off basically during a snowstorm from the rest of her group, and she and them begin to be chased by a bunch of zombies.
Now, the reason she's cut off from her group, if I remember right, is because she's left them after an argument over whether or not what they're doing is right, without them saying what they're doing.
Yeah, she's having a spat basically with the rest of her group as to like, we've been out here looking forever. I don't know if they're going to find them. And
is it worth it? Is it worth jeopardizing everybody else's safety?
Yeah. And she ends up lost in the snow and gets rescued by Tommy and Joel and brought back to this hotel they're all staying in. Meanwhile, Dina and Jesse and Ellie are also out on patrol and are now looking for Joel because he's overdue. He's overdue. They're supposed to link up with him and they're out looking for him. And we all converge at the end of Act 1, basically in this hotel, as they think that they've seen Joel and Tommy's horses, and Ellie, rushing into the hotel, realizes that something is wrong, and Abby and her friends immediately turn on Joel and Tommy, knock out Tommy, and Abby begins to brutally beat Joel, as does the rest of the group. They all kind of take turns beating on him, and when Ellie arrives in this hotel, this is the person that you played through the first game. He is in pieces on the ground, and Act 1 closes with us watching Abigail brutally murder our main character. And so this is one of our main spoilers, but it is a savage death. She executes him, but she does it in a way where it takes forever.
She takes her time.
Purpose.
She takes her time.
Yeah. In front of her brother and Ellie. But, and this is really important, they basically leave Tommy and Ellie. They do not harm them. Like, they knock them out and like rough them up a little bit, but they do not do to Tommy and Ellie what they do to Joel. And this closes out Act 1. And so when Act 2 begins, you have a heartbroken Joel and Ellie and Dina basically arguing as what to do. Right? It's been a couple days. They've kind of recovered.
Well, I think Joel is worse than heartbroken at that point.
That's right, Tommy. Yeah, Tommy. Joel is head broken at this point. His head is completely caved in. They've had a funeral for him. They've had a memorial. They buried him. And they are wrestling with what to do next, basically. Whoever these people were, they're gone. They've cleared out. They've disappeared. And you discover that Tommy's wife has refused Tommy's request to send basically every person they have out to hunt these guys down and kill them. And Ellie and Dina are arguing over what to do next. And you realize that Ellie is, one, incapable of letting this go, as is Tommy, and that she's going to sneak out no matter what Tommy's wife says. Like, this is just happening. They're going after these people. They're going to kill this girl, Abby, that brutally murdered Joel. And so our second act of this is the revenge story of Ellie. She is systematically tracking them back to Seattle, exploring what's going on in Seattle between the WLF, which are the Wolves, and another weird group living out there, a cult called the Seraphites, which the Wolves refer to as Scars, who all scar their faces up. And to get to Abigail, she will brutally kill every single one of Abigail's friends.
And this part of it feels like, even though you're playing Ellie and not Joel, this feels like a continuation of the first game. Like, this part feels thematically, narratively, emotionally similar. It's on the same route.
What's funny is you have someone who's lost someone brutally, which is Ellie now, stepping into the role of Joel, and she is enacting her vengeance basically on these people. And while you do while physically you feel like what she's doing is similar to the first game, one of the things that you realize as you're doing this, because the audience proxy is Dina, the girl with her,
Yep.
and Jesse, who arrives to basically also rescue them, because what's happened is Tommy has run off ahead of them and they're tracking him. And you are following in the wake of Tommy, trying to also find Abigail back in Seattle. And you are witnessing Tommy do horrific shit. Absolutely horrific shit to these people that he's like tracking down. And you're kind of in his wake. And so you're following your own sort of like set of clues to get to them and doing progressively more horrible Tommy-like, Joel-like things on your way to get there. And so while the physical actions of like killing other people and like following a trail, like to get to like an end state is there, the people around you start kind of questioning how you're going about doing it, which doesn't happen in the first game.
No.
And we'll get to this when we talk to the Dark Exhibition and the emotional quadrant of this, but it doesn't feel the same to play as the first one did. You feel like your reasons for doing things are not as purely motivated, basically, as you get through Act 2 of
But
this
that
game.
does creep up on you a bit. It's not that it's not clear at the start.
No, because
It's
you
that
feel the same as Ellie does at the start.
It's that it escalates as you go.
Yeah, you feel the same anger and sadness of losing your main audience player protagonist as Ellie does in the beginning. But as the second act stretches out, you've killed all of Abby's friends to track her down. And eventually your friends and Tommy are convinced we're not going to get to her. There's a war breaking out in this city between these two factions, the WLF and the Seraphites, the Scars. We're just going to go home. And the second act ends with you being ambushed by the girl you were tracking, Abigail, Tommy being brutally shot in the head, Jesse being murdered, like shot actually in the head and killed, and Ellie being beaten, and Abigail just saying, "You've completely wasted the opportunity I gave you to live. We let you go. You didn't have to come back. You wasted this chance that you were given." And you are left totally off kilter as a player. And then the third act begins and your roles are completely switched. You replay the same days that you just played as Ellie hunting down Abigail, but from Abigail's point of view.
Yeah.
And you are presented with this incredible moment where every person you killed, dog you murdered, and person who was a bad guy is now your friend from the point of view of the player protagonist. Because you are now Abigail, and everyone who was a boss or a villain or a person out on patrol that was trying to kill you is now your friend and cohort. And you are warmed up to them in the same way.
And what's interesting is by flipping it around, right? Like, again, when you look at it as just a video game, an action shooter survival video game,
Yep.
normally in those games, you as the player character, your protagonist POV, you have motivations that you will view as legitimate.
Yep.
And your opponents either don't have motivations, they're just NPCs,
Yep.
or they have motivations that you clearly understand not to be legitimate.
Yeah. And in this case,
This isn't going to go that
you're
way.
flipped over. And at the end, it's worth also stating too that through flashbacks at the end of Act 2, you realize that Ellie has at some point 2 years before gone back to Salt Lake City, found a recording of what's happened to the Fireflies, realized Joel has killed them all, asked Joel point blank if he did it, and he says, "Yes, I absolutely did." And she says, "I'll go." She says to him, "Tell me the truth or I'm never coming back to you. You'll never see me again. Tell me the truth and I'll go back to Jackson with you." And he tells her the truth and she says, "I'll go back to Jackson with you, but you and I are done. We're never talking again. Like, we're finished. You've taken away all the meaning that was in my life." And this is a huge inciting trauma for why they are the way they are at the beginning of the game. So Act 3 begins. And at the beginning of Act 3 now, we are playing Abigail through the same days. And we are presented with her trauma. And her trauma, you discover, is she is the daughter of the doctor that Joel has murdered. You're presented with that right from the beginning.
That at this point, having played the first game, you may very well have felt perfectly okay about for literal years.
And for 7 years after playing this game, you've felt okay about having killed this guy. You are presented with your repercussions as the player character on a young girl who has lost absolutely everything and on her group of friends who were also there. everyone who was a boss for this second act of the game that you've been murdering, they all had their lives ruined by Joel because he effectively wiped out the Fireflies. And the Fireflies voted to disband, and then looking for shelter have joined the WLF in Seattle as they've migrated around. And so now her arc is basically a trauma, and then you are playing through her and what she's become. She's Joel. She is a super soldier. She is basically the cold-hearted, stone-cold killer of the WLF who will kill as many scars as you tell her to kill. She'll never ask questions. She'll always follow orders. And a job is a job is a job to her. And her arc through the third act of the game is basically being sent on a mission by her commanding officer, who you realize is also a callous, like, killing machine, a real son of a bitch. And that he has basically set a plan to wipe out once and for all this cult of these people called Scars. And all through, like, the exposition, you get to learn more about this Seattle quarantine zone and what's been happening here in the history of this place. And you are placed firmly in the position of, this is that story that we had in the first game playing out again. A fallen quarantine zone, people living on the edge of, like, constantly being wiped out, and humans warring with humans, where the zombies are an existential threat at all times, but they're more an environmental condition, and it's still just people killing people.
They're the white noise in the background.
That's right.
Right? Like, they're like any of us in the real world being worried about dying of exposure. That's not the real threat that most of us are living with.
And the needs must of doing terrible things has been perpetuated. And they've traded one bad government in Fedra for another bad government in the WLF. But that things are generally kind of okay, right? And then also things are kind of generally okay with the Scars too. And that they're maybe invading mainland because they're living on Seattle Island or no, it's not Vancouver Island, it's Seattle, it's the island, yeah. And that they are constantly basically warring back and forth. And through the entire third act, you are now presented with a transformation akin to the transformation of the first game, where she softens as a person. She rescues two Seraphites, one of which you've discovered is a transgendered boy who was to be married off to one of the cult elders, basically, and decided to cut their hair and basically rebel. And that their sister, who initially was, like, terrified and angry, has supported them. They're trying to get away from the cult. They're trying to escape this, like, life. And you decide you cannot kill these two children, and that you will escort them to safety no matter what you can do. And through a series of expositionary events, you realize that some of your friends are trying to do the same thing. That the boy that you were in love with at one point, who's basically now in a relationship with somebody else, and is going to have a child with that person, who is one of your group of friends from the Fireflies, is also planning escaping the WLF. And that he was another one of the soldiers. He's basically gone... It's a very Winter Soldier, where he's basically gone off the reservation, and you're sent to bring him back at one point, and he's rebuilt a sailboat and is going to escape. And that they've decided they're going to go look for the Fireflies, and there has to be something better out there. And at the end of Act 3, you are now synced up again with Ellie, and Abigail has to do a boss fight where you are now boss fighting your main protagonist character from the first half of the game. You have to boss fight Ellie. And it's a wonderful moment where you've completely flipped the game on its head. Everything that you expected from a second part of Last of Us has been subverted, and you're playing as an entirely new character who has lived through their trauma and has chosen twice now to break the cycle of trauma. They let Ellie live, and at the end of the third act, they let Ellie live again. They walk away, and Ellie and Dina and Tommy, who is horribly maimed now, are left to go back. And what's interesting about this third act is you are forced to then play through an epilogue. And the epilogue is Ellie having one last chance of redemption. And that last chance of redemption is that she is living on a farm with Dina. They're raising the baby that Dina had with Jesse. And everything's going to be okay, but she is constantly reliving her trauma. She's having night terrors. She'll have fugue states where she's screaming in peril. And Tommy shows up at the farm one day and says, we have found where Abigail might have gone, where Abby might have gone with this kid that she escaped Seattle with. I can't go. You have to go. And Dina says, no, you're not going. And then Ellie in the middle of the night sneaks off to go confront Abby one last time. She cannot put the revenge mission down, and you're replaying the second act again, basically, as Ellie hunting down Abby. through that process, you realize that that Abby, who you thought had gotten away, because you are actually playing as Abby a little bit after as well, has been captured by someone and is living as a slave to these people called the Rattlers. And you have one last final, you basically do an infiltration mission, you kill all these Rattlers, you free all the slaves, and they tell you that Abigail and Lev, who is the child that she's rescued, are down on the pylons. And the pylons are basically like crucifixion pylons down on the beach. They've been left to die of exposure. She cuts them down. You're really not sure, because you're not given any agency at this point in the game. Mostly you're following what Ellie would do. It's not like a BioShock where you could kill them or not kill them. Like you actually, BioShock doesn't have any agency. That's funny that I mentioned that. It's more like a Mass Effect where you're given like a red light, blue light kind of thing to do. You're forced for these actions. But at the end of it all, Ellie finally, although she has like a they live level fight in the surf with Abigail, who says, just let us go. Like, I don't want to fight you. I won't fight you. And Ellie threatens Lev with a knife and says, you're going to fight me, or I'm going to kill her right now in front of you. I'm going to do what you did to Joel in front of you. She eventually just lets go of her grief and lets her go. And the story ends with Abigail on a boat, maybe going to Santa Barbara to find, or to Catalina Island to try and find the remnants of the Fireflies who are regrouping. And Ellie going home to the farmhouse to discover that Dina's left, gone back to Jackson. The life that she could have had is over. And she tries to play as Joel's guitar. She's got 2 of her fingers bitten off in the fight with Ellie, with Abby. She can't do it, and she leaves the guitar behind. Because all through the game, the symbolism of Joel being still in her life is her playing guitars and seeing guitars, and she leaves it and she walks away. And so we are presented with playing through a cycle of trauma over and over and over, and how trauma affects other people, and the cyclical nature of trauma. And so, as we've now finished our voyage through this storyline, we've had 2 of our fingers bitten off.
I feel like I need a shower.
That's right. We've come upon the Wyoming Zoo of Natural History full of dinosaurs, and scrawled on the walls are the writings of the people who have survived there. And we enter the Dark exhibition.
Tickets, please. Tickets. All lining up now for entry to the Dark exhibition.
And so now we have to decide, are we going to go into the gift shop and buy some toy dinosaurs? And is this a product? Or are we going to look at the writings and appreciate the cordyceps, the beauty of the cordyceps mushroom growing up along the walls, and make our decisions as to whether or not this is art or a product? And I'm going to go first, obviously, because this is my episode. I think that this has to be art, because they did not make something that was fun to play. They made a game that elicited a million different emotions and made me feel gross half of the time I was playing it. Made me feel upset and angry and horrified at the decisions people were making and the decisions that people had made on them. No one has any kind of happy ending all through this. And that is like the bravest artistic decision to make, because you are making something that, by virtue of its being creation, this game, guess how much this game cost to make in 20.
Oh, I have no idea.
So it was, I think development started in like 2015 or 2016. Guess how much, just make a guess.
I honestly have no idea what video games
$220 million they spent making this game. $220 million.
It's a huge gamble on some of the choices they made.
That is more than most big budget blockbuster motion pictures cost to make. So like that is a huge gamble on something this upsetting to make. And so for me, that is like why Neil Druckmann, who this game had a director, first of all, tons of voice acting and tons of motion capture in it, which is why it cost as much to make and why it was as pretty as it was. This is Sony investing a huge amount into a massive artistic gamble that I personally think pays off. But what did you think about this? Do you think this is a product? Do you think, because I mean, it is designed to be sold. It's a game.
Yeah.
How did you think about this?
I agree with you. I definitely think it's art. I'm on a similar track in terms of why I think it's art. And I'm going to do something I generally hate doing, which is I like to define something as what it is, not what it isn't.
Sure.
But one of the reasons why it cannot be a product to me, and again, yeah, it is a product. They're selling it for a product.
Yeah.
But the reason why it can't be product first is it's not, you look at it from the point of view of how it made you feel or some of the artistic choices they made. I look at it from the point of view that if I work at Naughty Dog, if I'm in senior management there and I'm trying to sell this,
Yeah.
I want to give players what they think they want, not what's going to be interesting or rewarding, right? So if it was being developed as a product, whether or not Joel was the protagonist through the game, he definitely wouldn't die, because you would definitely want to keep that on the hook that you've still got Joel in your in-game universe.
Think about the 4-quadrant box.
Right.
Right? The average video game consumer is one of those boxes. Is not all 4 of those boxes.
So if I'm in charge of Naughty Dog, I want Joel to be in The Last of Us Part 3.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, because he's your audience proxy.
Period.
Right?
Like,
a white male protagonist is the 4-quadrant answer to who is your protagonist going to be.
So to remove and he remains in the narrative through this game.
He does, yeah.
But that clearly has a finite endpoint, right? And if I wanted there to be a Last of Us 3, 4, 5, 12, whatever, I would want Joel to be in there forever.
Absolutely.
We all saw what happened with Konami when they decided people are tired of playing Solid Snake. Let's have Raiden be the new protagonist. Didn't land, right? But that's because there was nothing artistically rewarding about it. There was nothing that made it was just a swap to update a character, basically.
They made what they wanted to make, not what the 4-quadrant boxes said they should make to reach the broadest market of audience.
So I definitely think it's art because they decided to do things that would be narratively interesting, narratively rewarding, that would take chances that weren't, in spite of the fact that in some parts you're literally following the same story beats and story arc, it's not a repetition of it as a formula. The whole point of following those same beats and that same arc is to elicit a different reaction and a different outcome.
And I would argue that the outrage this game that you talked about at the beginning, where you were like, oh my God, some of what I read about, some of the reactions I then perceived about this game are more upsetting than the game is.
Yeah, 100%.
That to me is the best argument for them having succeeded in making a piece of art, because it upset people.
Because I think all those, I shouldn't say all those people, a lot of those people who were deeply upset, they were deeply upset because they wanted a product. Mm-hmm. And like nobody thinks about it that way. They think, no, I want to have this, enjoyable, rewarding gameplay experience. But I think people who were deeply upset by the choices that were made wanted a product. They wanted something that was a second chapter in the story of these two characters that ends with a very similar feeling and vibe, and that's not what they got.
And to be fair to Naughty Dog customers, they do that in Uncharted. You get Nathan Drake on Nathan Drake on Nathan Drake, and he is the same audience proxy, super spry, wall climbing, adventure Indiana Jones type in all 3 of those games, episodically on episodically. And those are also great games.
Yeah.
They are wonderful traversal games, but they're not a story-driven game same way.
And I don't think product versus art is necessarily a qualitative argument, right?
No.
Like you can have product that's really high quality. You can have art that's really low quality.
That's right. It doesn't give it a value. It's just, where does this fall on the spectrum of, are they trying something different versus are they regurgitating something they've already done to you to sell it to you?
And I think it's funny that it's so subversive in so many different ways, because I think they're trying something different while simultaneously wrapping it in the exact same trappings. Like it's layers within layers.
It's almost written for TV.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, it's more written for TV. And it's funny because this is before there's a TV show.
Yep.
So this is more written for TV than almost any game I've ever played, because it is presented non-chronologically, right? You are shown things non-chronologically and play through them back to front, front to back, and repeat days from different POVs. It is very complicated to absorb even as the player, because you are forced to do some of the same beats over and over again, and you are presented with upsetting things. Like you will kill a dog in a game that then you learn the name of and pet as a different player character throughout the course of a game.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I had a similar, unironically similar, I don't know, similar experience when I actually watched The Last of Us TV show. Because when I watched the TV show, having played the first game, when Troy Baker shows up,
yeah.
and it's so Troy Baker is Joel, is the voice actor for Joel.
Yeah. Also of the what is he?
Booker DeWitt.
Booker DeWitt, yeah. From
But when he shows up in the show, playing a different character that you know is going to die, in the TV show, I'm like, I don't want to see Joel die. And he's not Joel, he's Troy Baker, he's an actor, right? He's playing a part. I don't want to see him die. And like seeing him die was on some level upsetting.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you get 2 or 3 more episodes down the road and Ashley Johnson shows up in a cameo. And Ashley Johnson is the voice actress for Ellie.
Yeah.
And because of what character she's playing, you know she's going to die. And I'm like, I don't want to watch Last of Us and see Joel and Ellie die. And again, they're not playing Joel and Ellie. They're just actors playing parts. So to get to this game, and then to have actual Joel, not just the actor playing Joel playing a different character, die? Yeah, it's jarring.
Yeah. All right, cool. So we're in agreement here then. So I think it's time to exit the exhibition, wander into the streets of the quarantine zone of Seattle, and I guess head into a abandoned hospital where there's maybe a rat king in the basement, a horrifying conglomerate of things, but there's all kinds of stuff the doctors have scrawled on the walls before they succumb to the cordyceps virus, and we enter the Grim Asylum.
Pack your bags and chew off your fingers. It's time to spend the night in the Grim Asylum.
All right, so in this section, we're going to talk about themes that we picked out of this that make it grim dark. These are not necessarily have to come from every single one of our buckets of themes, but typically they are themes that we felt pulled this into that category and camp as this kind of media. And so the first one for me, as far as like setting, is that dystopic element of different societies at war with each other, and each of the societies that you might see as being heroes are also presented as villains. So like the militarized WLF, where they begin as these kind of like ideologues that are overthrowing the government in Seattle, the quarantine zone federal government, and then become the villains. To me, that's very dystopic. Same with the cult, where there's clearly someone who just was helping people on Seattle Island, and they then became like a messianic figure. They die tragically, as you uncover through like finding bits and pieces of like literature on the ground and reading like the letters they write to her. And someone at some point has used this messianic figure to come into power as a bunch of village elders, and they've created this very dark, twisted cult society living on the island that force people to do abhorrent things. Both these societies are at war with each other, but both of these societies are also clearly at war with themselves, as both sides have people trying to escape. You have Lev and Yara trying to escape from the Scars, which is the Seraphites. And of course, you have Owen and Mel, who is pregnant with Owen's child, trying to escape on a boat from the WLF. So that dystopic element to me, which I think is reinforced by the idea that you are in a zombie game with mushroom zombies, cordyceps zombies, but they're not the bad guy. The bad guy is still the humans. And as someone who's written a game about zombies, they are always the force majeure. Zombies are a disaster movie trope. They are not a horror movie trope. You are competing with them as an environmental factor. And that puts this firmly in that dystopic sort of like grim and dark element for me, that there are no good guys, and even the heroes of one story eventually become the villains of another story. That is like that leans into that setting element for me. What about you?
Yeah, I actually would have to go with 2 things for setting. First of all, dystopia for sure.
Yeah.
It's undeniably dystopian setting for all the reasons that you've already listed. However, the thing I would layer on top of that, because again, you are telling a story, but you're trying to milk an emotional reaction from people, and the way that you milk that emotional reaction from people in this is through inversion, right? It's the good guys are the bad guys are the good guys, the heroes are the villains are the heroes. It's that never goes away. Mm-hmm. Like that never. They do it just like 6
times over the course of the game.
And as much as again the backdrop is just a dystopian setting, everything emotional about the game, everything I'd argue everything important about the game is driven by inversion.
Yeah, you're right. Because every time you do something that on its face might seem just or heroic, you are then presented with the consequence of that action. and the repeating of the trauma basically that's happening over and over again by killing all of Abby's friends. You're just repeating this process of trauma that Joel did back. You're becoming Joel. You're killing all of the fireflies.
So here's
back
the
in
thing. In the first game, right, when you kill the fireflies in the hospital, you're killing the fireflies in the hospital. There's a doctor, there's a couple nurses.
You don't know them, you don't know their names.
Right? You're not killing Abby's friends. You're killing Owen, and you're killing Mel, and you're killing Yara. Like, you're killing real people, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and they make a point of saying everybody's name.
And I know you didn't want to get hyper specific, but like the moment where no matter what level of, no matter how much you can justify violence against these characters, the fight between Mel and Owen and Abby, when Abby flips Mel over,
or Ellie, when Ellie
flips Mel over, and her coat opens up and she's pregnant. That, like, she's retching on the ground. Like, that is the moment where you're like, wait, what have I done? What have I done?
Yeah. And you can see how all of this violence is also affecting Ellie. You, the player character.
Yeah.
Like, how it's also, like, killing you at the same time. It is horrifying. Okay, so moving on then from setting, let's talk a little bit about tone. And this, I think, is important because, like, we have these, like, themes of tone that go all through this. And where are we going to sit on because the next strongest one for me is the emotional palette. That, like, that trauma and that wrath and that hatred is, if I'm going to, like, strongest, like, the dystopian thing is the setting, and I think it's undeniable, but hatred, 100%. That idea of hatred and that the trauma that you've basically had to undergo then soaks you so much that you have to get it out of you by acting that violence out onto somebody else. That is the entire emotional palette of this. Is you are angry from the very beginning, with Ellie being angry at Joel for lying to her, angry all the way to the end, and that the expulsion of that anger is the final moment where she puts Joel down and walks away from it and has to, like, be completely empty and done with it. It's like burned itself out. And you get to see that that's just, like, repeated over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. You know, in the first game, I think you're a little bit more driven by the notion of fear. Like, you don't want to get caught by the zombies. You want to protect Ellie. You're afraid for her. But in this game, yeah, it is complete anger and hatred. Like, the first time playing as Ellie, I think it's the first time, you confront one of Abby's friends, and it's Nora.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you hunt her like an animal, for starters.
Through a hospital, yeah. Or through a base. Yeah, the base of the hospital.
Yeah, and then you fall through the floor and everything. But, like, for starters, you hunt her like an animal. The next thing is, from the outside looking in, they've made Nora the least likable, I think, of Abby's friends. So you feel, and
she talks tons of shit to you, too.
Yeah, so you feel the most justified in what you're doing.
Yeah.
But then at the end, when you are going to finish her off one way or the other, right? And you're basically threatening her if she doesn't give up Abby. And she's already inhaled the spores. She's like, I'm going to die anyway. I don't really care. Like, it doesn't, you have nothing to threaten me with. And Ellie's only response is to tell her that, she can either make it quick or she can take her fucking time with it.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is who you're playing. This is your character. Like, your character is like, no, I am going to kill the shit out of you, but I may not make it last as long. Mm-hmm. That's not fear. That's not terror. That is hatred.
It's anger and hatred. And you can see how she wants to do to someone what was done to Joel.
Yeah.
And this is the first time she's had someone in her crosshairs that was there that she can do that to.
And this is the closest she comes to actually just straight up reenacting that scene, because she beats her to death with a lead pipe.
She is cruel and gets the information out of her.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is you reveal later on, like, she gets her info. This girl begs for her life and she kills her anyway, but she takes her sweet ass time killing her.
Yeah.
And it is brutal. And Ellie is becoming the Joel proxy that's always ahead of her, which is Tommy, who you're seeing all of Tommy's, like, terrible, like, torture devices he's doing basically to get information from the wolves that he's catching. And so from there, it's the life cycle stuff. And this is clearly steeped in what death does to people and the trauma that death can leave in your life and losing people can do. The entirety of The Last of Us is steeped in loss and the trauma that loss creates in people. And so I think that it's unavoidably about death because
It's in the title.
it is, yeah, The Last of Us. And so that you feel each death more and more. And it forces you as a player where you are killing nameless people in the first Last of Us. They're always hunters or cannibals or people who
It's
you
the
feel like
doctor,
deserve
the
it.
cannibal, the whatever.
You always feel like they deserve it. In this game, everyone calls each other by name. If you kill someone, they go, oh no, they got Jeff. Ah, Tommy's down. Like whoever's like, everyone has a name. They are forcing you to confront the humanity of who you're killing. And then forcing you to see it, like you said, inverted from the complete other side. And so death is like a core theme, and how that finality is almost made worse by the circumstances of this like cordyceps plague and the fact that there are people around who are not dead. We've lost them anyway, but they're not dead. And then losing yourself to death is this emotionally traumatic moment that elicits these moments of like rage and hatred that have to be acted out over and over and over again in a cycle. So I think that leads to like my final emotional theme. Because I don't feel like this one has as strong a like immensity, endlessness. Like I don't feel like this, because it's all very personal.
Yeah.
We're forced into the shoes of these people. And while you do realize that this is like a global pandemic that's happened everywhere and that like maybe it'll never end and humanity can't seem to get its shit together to actually rebuild society. It's been 25 years and we're still too busy fighting over the scraps to actually like build something back up again in most places. It doesn't have those tones. So I don't feel like that's necessarily one of the things this is trying to convey to us. The only tone of like endlessness that I get from it is the repetition of the cycle of violence. Yeah. Is that it happens over and over and over again. And that's me stretching a bit to try and find it, because Ellie does break it in the end, and Abby actually breaks it before she does. Abby lets her go like 3 times. And then Ellie eventually like does the same thing and lets Abby go at the end. So like that repetition of the cycle is the only like thing that feels a little bit endless. But honestly, that to me is more the emotional palette of, not the emotional palette, but the tonal palette of like the futility.
Yeah.
And I think that to me is where it actually gets nailed in, is no matter how much revenge you take, no matter how many people you kill, your trauma is with you forever. And you can either face your trauma, which Ellie does in the end and Abigail does as well, or you can act it out on other people over and over again. And time will tell if Abby actually is facing her trauma or if she's just found a proxy in Lev, much like Joel did in Ellie, to find some redemption in and to like work towards a more positive future. Because one of the big reveals at the very, very end in the epilogue is there is a reconciliation right before Joel's killed, where they sit on the porch together and Ellie confesses, I don't think I can ever forgive you for what you did, but I'd like to try.
Yeah.
And Joel confesses, if I was given that same moment over to do again, I would do it every single time. I would never not kill the entire world to save you. And there's some arguments to be made that Ellie didn't have agency and that Joel did what he did because she couldn't consent to it because she was unconscious, and that Joel's actions were somehow justified by that. But in that moment, Joel confesses, I just couldn't lose you. I didn't do it because you didn't have the ability to consent and I didn't know if this was what you would want or not. I knew this is what you didn't want, but I couldn't let you die. And so I would kill these guys a million times over and over again. And that sense of futility where the cycle keeps repeating itself and you're powerless against it until it like burns itself out, or somehow you're forced to let go of it or confront it, which is Ellie eventually is forced to do. She can't kill Abigail, and she lets go of it all, and she lets go of Joel, more importantly, at the end. That basically makes you feel gross about the entire game you just played. That nothing either side did was heroic, except for maybe Abigail, but also that at the beginning she's the villain, and she's gone on the revenge mission Ellie's about to go on at the very outset of the game.
Yeah. And
so it all just feels pointless and futile, and that all these people died for nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that feeling that everybody is trapped in the cycle that really conveys that, because even if you take that out of this environment and out of I guess, out of any kind of real hostile, negative situation. Like if people think about their own real world lives, right? Like people who feel that there's a certain sense of pointlessness or oppression to what they're going through. It's typically people who are repeating patterns over and over again, and they can't break them for whatever reason.
Definition of insanity, right?
Yeah. But it's the notion that I do something every day and there's no meaning to it. Like I just wake up. It's Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
And but not funny. And this is that, right? Like it's kill everybody you want. It won't bring whoever it is. If you're Abby, it won't bring your father back, and if you're Ellie, it won't bring Joel back. And all any of them are doing, like formulaically, you could remake this same game 100 times with characters you don't see on screen that are the people left behind by the people that got killed in this game, right? Like it just, there's a sense that until you run out of people, this just won't stop.
And that there is no one in the game who is able to create anything without walking away from their trauma. You see it in Dina, where she's lost her sister, and she says at one point to Ellie, I would do worse if I ever caught the people who killed my sister than what you just did to this girl that killed Joel. I would do worse. But then she's able to walk away from it. And she also says to Ellie, like, I didn't go hunt those people down. I didn't do those things. I'm here now. I'm looking forward. I'm not stuck looking backwards. Whereas Ellie and Tommy are stuck looking backwards at all the terrible things that are happening, and they are incapable of making anything. And all the societies that you see that are incapable of making anything are slowly decaying. And that's where that final theme comes in for me, which is entropy, is that not just the, and this is I think the grimmest part of it all, not just the the personal stories are decaying, that the societies that have those people in them are all decaying. That the wolves are decaying, that they are slowly shrinking in Seattle. Neighborhoods are shrinking back to this like one militarized place, which is the stadium they all live in. That the people are now like the society is starting to crumble basically on the Seraphites, that they're tearing down everything and like making things simpler, but at the same time like culturally they're going backwards and backwards and backwards after their leaders died. That the only places where people are building something are where those people have let go of their trauma, and that's like Jackson. But when we compare the four societies, which include the Rattlers that we're like presented with, most of the societies are in decline.
Yeah.
And that decline is everywhere. It isn't personal, it's global. Everything is still in decay and everything is still falling apart. And even the farmhouse that Ellie and Dina build at one point, when she comes back to it, is abandoned and empty and in disrepair and like falling apart.
Yeah.
And you've just seen it basically glowing and full of life, maybe 40 minutes before as you play through the epilogue.
Well, it's literally like Dina, like not being there when she comes back is literally, again, it's a repeat of the moment where Ellie walks away from Joel in the prequel to this game like 4 years earlier. Like you haven't made anything better. You're just living through, like they're on an assembly line, right?
Yeah.
Like they're switching which positions in the story they're in, but nothing is getting better.
And there are far more characters engaged in that hatred and that wrath and that anger than there are characters engaged in trying to make things better.
Yeah.
And you really get that sense of a candle that's slowly going out. That humanity is the stub of a candle, and that is getting towards the bottom of like being able to like burn in the darkness. So yeah, to me, that's where that emotional power goes. All right. Well, we've pulled out our themes. We've woken up in the basement. The Rat King is dead. We've managed to escape from this infested hospital. And we're presented by a throne of mushroom skulls.
The Dark Lords of the Void wish to know, where does this media sit upon the throne of skulls?
So we have to decide, where does this sit for each of us in the landscape of Grimdark media? We only have two things to compare it to right now.
Yep.
And that is the Call of Cthulhu and the Astartes, right? To put it next to. And I'll be honest, as my rating system for this is very powerfully based in how I felt while I was engaged with it. I have never felt more bleak and hopeless engaging with a piece of media than I felt with this in a long time. Like, I shouldn't say never, but it takes a lot, because I've consumed so much of this, it takes a lot to elicit like a strong emotional reaction for me. I felt upset playing this. And those grim, dark themes have never, I think, been conveyed by a piece of like video game media to me as powerfully in recent memory as they have them by this game. And so this to me is actually going on top. This is going ahead of the Call of Cthulhu.
Crazy.
Yeah, I know. So that's going to leave us with Astartes in number 3, Call of Cthulhu in number 2, and this in number 1. I loved this game because I was so upset by it. And because of how brave it is to make something this specifically designed to challenge the audience. If we're talking about these themes, if you are creating something that is to be consumed as art, and you are intending to challenge someone with what are upsetting things, I was upset by this, and it really succeeded in what it was trying to do. So what about you?
Yeah, I feel a bit different about it. I don't feel different about the reaction to it. Like all of your analysis of why you put it where you put it, I would agree with. But for me, I've got to flip them. So for me, Call of Cthulhu is still the top.
Yeah.
I would put Astartes in the second position, and I would put Last of Us Part 2 in the third. And again, it's not that I disagree with what made you put it on top. It's that for me, the fact that there's more out there that you can't see that could be better.
Sure.
Right? Like everything about the story is telling us it won't be better.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, we've never encountered any place where it gets better.
Right. But like the idea that you could go, I don't know, south into Mexico, north into Canada, wherever, and maybe the way those governments
someone's doing it
adapted to it didn't do that. It on a personal level, it probably feels the most grimdark of the 3 stories. But on a global scale, to me, it feels the least grimdark of all the stories.
Yeah, fair enough. So that's it. We did it. We did another one. We got through a piece of game media. We've done all 3 now. We've done all 3. We've done
one of each.
Yeah, we've done a piece of film media. We've done a piece of literature, and we've done a piece of game material media. And so now we get to repeat the cycle. And you picked.
Wait, I thought we just learned that we shouldn't keep repeating the cycle.
I know, and yet I am here trapped in the cycle of my own creation. And you got to pick the piece of film media that's coming up next. So what did you pick? So people can watch ahead and not be spoiled.
Yeah, absolutely. I picked, which apparently we found out recently will require effort for you to read ahead if you want.
It's only because I'm not willing to dig in the storage unit to try and find one DVD.
Well, no, but so I picked Event Horizon, which you said you were not able to find on any streaming service.
I couldn't find any streaming services. It's available to rent or buy, but not like just in ones I'm subscribed to. And I'm subscribed to pretty much all of them because I'm a movie junkie. So I couldn't find it available for streaming. That could also just be a Canada problem. People might be able to find on streaming. I rented it from Apple TV because I wasn't willing to go and dig for mine in my storage unit and try and find it. Because you should still own physical media. Physical media is important. But this is, I think this is going to be a good palate cleanser after The Last of Us Part 2 because this movie's a treasure. I'm so excited we get to watch this.
I think the other thing too is that Last of Us Part 2, because like the future it's set in could literally be next Wednesday.
Yeah. It's 2013 actually. They set The Last of Us as the outbreak is 2013.
But what I mean by that is like it as science fiction-y as it is, it feels very real and of its time.
Sure.
Whereas Event Horizon does not.
No, it's such a treasure. It's directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. Yes, that Paul W.S. Anderson, not the one that not PTA, not Paul Thomas Anderson, who directed things like Magnolia and Boogie Nights. And this is the director of every video game adaptation in the 90s, starting with Mortal Kombat in 95.
Mortal Kombat!
Dun, 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 dun. So this is going to be a treasure. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this sort of like grim, dark dissertation on The Last of Us Part 2. We'll be back with some lighter fare with Event Horizon.
Lighter fare with Event Horizon.
Get your eyes gouged out now. We're going to Event Horizon. Bye, everybody.